Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the weirdest incident of It's a Small World you've ever had in your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked at Disney World for the college program a couple of years ago. An older couple came in line on my ride and began speaking about how they come multiple times a year because they're members of the Disney Vacation program. They told me how friendly they thought I was, and how I looked exactly like a younger version of their old boss's husband. We kept talking for a few minutes, and the wife mentioned how happy she was to be out of the cold New York weather, and in Florida. I mentioned I too am from New York, and we realized she is a retired nurse from the town in which I was born. By the time we finished speaking, we realized she had worked as a nurse for my grandma almost 40 years before, and the man she thought I looked like 100% was in fact my grandfather. It was unreal and freaky. I called my grandma to tell her what had happened when my shift ended, and she went on to tell me how she remembers the lady all the way back to the first day of work, almost 40 years before. It was weird. I dated a girl from the summer before my senior year of high school until the first couple of weeks of my sophomore year of college. A little over 2 years total we were together. It was my first serious relationship, and I was absolutely crushed when she dumped me. 4 years later, after finishing grad school, I decided to pack everything up and move to New York City. I found a place with some roommates in Crown Heights. Maybe a week or two before moving, I'm strolling down the street to get coffee. I turn around the corner, and my ex is right there. It was the first time I saw or talked to her in probably 3 years. Found out she was also deciding to move to New York City, settled in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, and was living literally in the building next to mine. Like, I could look out my window and see into the living room of her apartment. Edit for more details. We ended up grabbing drinks to catch up. I was extremely hesitant because it took me a solid year to fully get over her, and I didn't want to go back down that rabbit hole. It wasn't too awkward, but definitely no chemistry there. I've always been much more attracted to women of color, but had always been too shy to actually pursue it. In the 3 to 4 years since we had broken up, I'd made an effort to do so. Also, something during those same years, she had discovered that she was a lesbian and was no longer dating men. Suffice to say, there wasn't exactly a whole lot of mutual attraction left between us. We would run into each other every couple of weeks. But a few months after moving to New York City, I started dating a girl who convinced me to move to DC with her. That was almost 4 years ago. Getting married next year. I took a new job in a city where we knew no one, and a friend of my mother-in-law sets us up with a guy who was renting his house close to my future place of work. So we gave him a call, and as part of the conversation, I told him my real name, which is a weird one but is the same name as my dad's, and sometimes I have to spell it out for people. He was pretty shocked when he heard my first and last name because he supposedly worked with a guy with the exact same name. I didn't make a big deal out of it and was thinking he was bullshitting me to close the deal, but once we met him, my wife asked about the other guy he worked with. He called him and explained what was going on. We chatted and asked me about where I lived before and who my dad was, and yep, this guy turned out to be the lost stepbrother my dad had with another woman. Gave him the same name and everything. It was pretty weird, and we didn't keep in touch afterwards. Since I updated my LinkedIn profile, sometimes I get offers or requests from his colleagues since we were studying the same thing. Oh gosh, it happened like a week ago. I went on holiday to my hometown to a different country that I live in, and sat by the waterfall with 2 friends, not a popular place. And they only learn English in school. They wanted to have a conversation with me, so I started asking basic stuff, etc. Then one asks where I live exactly, and I tell him, such and such town an hour away from Big Town. Then this woman that was sitting some distance away from us starts talking to me really excitedly. I'm so sorry for interrupting, but my ex-husband, name, is from the same town as you, and I was just calling my daughter to tell her how well you speak English, and that you're from the same town as her dad. And I'm like, alright, name of the ex-husband? I think that's my dad's friend, actually. At this point, she's freaking out and is going on about the daughter again. And I remember the guy once taking his daughter to a barbecue with my family. So I just mention Your daughter is called name? Seeing her reaction, I immediately regretted asking, as she got way too excited. You know each other? Oh my god, etc. And way too excited. Then decides to call for us to have a conversation. Really awkward phone call. The girl barely remembered who I was, and the lady was a little crazy. I like to talk to people on the internet. I meet people from all over the globe. A couple of years ago, I started talking to this guy from France. We shared some unconventional interests. We met on a BDSM forum. We get to talking for a while, and at one point I mentioned where I live. Now, I live in a small town, like small enough that it doesn't even have a Starbucks. Because of this, whenever I talk to strangers on the internet about where I live, I instead say that I live in the nearest big city. So I tell him that I live in this city, and he replies, "Oh, that's cool. My fiance lives near there. He lives in my small town." So that was pretty crazy. We meet this guy I met on the BDSM forum who lives in France, just happens to be in a long-distance relationship with somebody in my town. It doesn't stop there, though. So about a month later, this guy from France was coming to my town to see his fiance. And, given the context of how I met this person, he invited me to come hang out and have some fun with two of them. So dumb 18-year-old me went to the address of somebody I've never met before alone without telling anybody where I was going. Fortunately, nothing bad happened, but looking back, it's still probably one of the stupidest things I've done. So I get there, ring the doorbell, and the door is answered by the French guy, and one of my brother's old friends from high school. So of the thousands of people I could have met on that forum from anywhere in the world, I met a guy from France who was in a long-distance relationship with, out of anybody else in the world, a friend of my brother's from high school in my tiny-ass town. I may win this one if anyone sees this. We do. In the late 90s, I was a resident teacher at a high school prep school with very high behavioral expectations for both staff and students alike. Come spring break, the wife and I were going through a rough patch, and she had just lost our first pregnancy to a miscarriage, so we hopped a flight to Amsterdam. You know, Amsterdam, land of weed, which is there to help you feel better about losing what would have been the first child. Could have gotten me fired, but hell, sometimes you just have to throw it all to the wind and take off. So there we are, about 4 days in, and we've lost track of everything. Time, what frickin' country it is, whether we've seen the Anne Frank house yet, the works. But we're hungry, so we wander into one of those hibachi restaurants, you know, where they have communal seating. And then, just after we get seated, I hear or feel the next person come along and sit to my left. So I check my mental state. Yep, we're okay for random pleasantries right now, but not much else. Turn to say hi and discover that the frickin' president of the senior class has just been seated right next to wasted old me. And he's wearing his school jersey. And he's wasted too. And holding a beer, which is legal in Amsterdam but against the school codes, which apply at all times no matter when, where, and can cause immediate expulsion. And like a genius, the right words come to me. And I say, "Hey, we're gonna pretend this never happened, right?" And he says, "Oh, thanking God." And then blushes because profanity can also get you kicked out. And I buy him a beer, because in for a penny, in for a pound. We're all going to get fired and expelled anyway if anyone hears about this. And sure enough, we never speak about it again. Wayne, buddy, if you're out there, thanks for your discretion. I think the statute of limitations has expired, so feel free to tell the story on your own sometime too. So I've been dating this girl for about 6 months. I met her online. She's 4 years younger than me, was still in high school and graduated as we were still dating. She went to a private school and plays D&D once a week with some friends, one of which is Alex. For months I assumed every time that Alex was her friend Alex I had already met, until I said something about him and was told, no, this is the Alex you don't know. So for the last couple of months, he's been referred to in stories as the Alex you don't know. I'm no longer dating that girl, but we still hang out regularly. And a couple of weeks ago, she showed me pictures of an outing to the aquarium she went on. I saw a picture of her in a group with a beluga, and things immediately clicked in my head, and I said, "That one's Alex. I know him." This Alex I had not seen in 3 years. He's the same age as me, and we were buddies in college. I dropped out for life reasons and hadn't kept in contact with any of my old friends. He happens to be one of the guys that introduced me to D&D, and we often hung out with the library between classes. I've been playing 2 or 3 times a week, every week since then. I joined his D&D night with her for the first time last week. To add to the confusion, I have transitioned since I met him. He didn't know my new name, and she didn't know my birth name. Their conversations together could never have been connected him to me. If I'd never seen that picture, I'd probably never have reconnected with him. I was recently on a business trip in Sydney. I took a few extra days to explore the city, which included a full-day bike tour. It was just myself, the guide, and 2 couples visiting from Melbourne. One of the couples was American and recently moved to Australia, and we were doing our intros. They mentioned that they were originally from Wisconsin. I also grew up in Wisconsin, so naturally I asked where they were from. The wife mentioned that she was from a small town I probably never heard of. It was actually a neighboring town from where I grew up. Turns out, we grew up only miles from one another and went to the same places when we were younger. The husband was also from Wisconsin, but grew up on the other side of the state in a town of only a few hundred people that neighbors my in-laws' town. There's a double whammy. I was playing pool with a friend against some random guys at a bar one night. The topic came up about doing coke in the bathroom toilets, and I said I had a funny video of an old flame who was having a line of coke snorted from her breast in a public toilet. It was a short video and not too clear, as she was wearing a hat in the video. I show my friend and the 2 guys and we laugh. I repeat the video a couple of times. Guy 1 says to Guy 2, "That looks a lot like your girlfriend." I freeze in terror, knowing full well she was seeing a new guy. The night plays out, him obviously suspect of the video. A few beers later he confronts me. "What's the name of that girl in your video?" I tell him to apologize as it is his girlfriend and offer to delete the video in front of him. We shake it off and laugh a little. I get an abusive text the next day about incriminating evidence. Chances of that happening are 1 in 4 million. I work for the Walt Disney Company in Orlando, Florida, but I was born and raised in a very small town in Louisiana. Years ago, a high school friend of mine was visiting Disney's Magic Kingdom Park and decided he should look me up. He walked up to the first Disney cast member, what they call employees, and he saw and asked for me by name. By chance, more than 5 years earlier, both the cast member and I had worked together at an entirely different park. Even better, we had just run into each other a week earlier, exchanged numbers, and talked about our new jobs. He happily told my friend exactly where he could find me. The next day, who should show up at my work but my friend from high school? After I got over my amazement at seeing him after all these years, I asked, "How did you find me?" He said, "I just asked the first guy I ran into." 65,000 employees at Walt Disney World, and he bumps into someone I know. Even better, it happened at the Magic Kingdom, home to the famous It's a Small World attraction. The Golden Watch. In college, I was heading to class in a part of town I don't frequently have classes in. There's the shortcut through a smallish park that people usually take. As I'm walking, something in my peripheral vision catches my eye, on the ground almost completely hidden by a bush. I walk over, and to my surprise, it's a gold watch, a nice Raymond wheel, which is probably worth around $2,000. There's no engraving, nothing to identify who the potential owner is, and I found it in a park. Don't really know where I could even hand it in. In the end, I think, well, finders keepers. I guess I can simply eBay it or something. When I get home, just before I'm about to go online and sell it, it strikes me that I know only of one person who actually owns a gold watch. But again, what are the odds that I find a random watch and it's his? Just to make sure, I give him a call so I can cross him off the list and go about my business. I ask him, "You haven't lost your watch recently, right?" "Nah, I haven't." "Hey, wait, where's my watch?" "It's not on my wrist." As it turns out, he had dropped his watch walking to class that morning, not noticing it until I called him. Once we ran the odds, we came to the conclusion of the 50,000 students and staff in the city that could have potentially walked on that path. 4 to 5 people at best, the owner included, could have made the connection that it might be his watch. That's a 0.01% chance. 15 years later, he's still wearing the watch, and to him, it's magical every day since. I know this topic isn't normal, scary, creepy, haunting stuff, but I love it. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. There's still plenty more stories to come, but of all the ones we'll hear today, this one about the watch, I mean, I've already read them all, so you're about to hear the rest, but I think this might be the one with the lowest probability of things actually happening, but I don't know. Either way, I like them. You got any stories like this? While going through the motions of enlisting in the Army, I stopped by my recruiter's office for some voluntary PT, and there was another person there as well, who I happened to work with a few years prior. We were friendly at work, but never really hung out outside of work, so we lost contact after he quit that job. The craziest part about it was that not only was he joining the Army like me, he was also going active duty. He was also going to the same place as me for basic training, same dates as well, and he also chose the exact same job as me, which meant after basic training, we were going to go to the same job training together. We also somehow managed to get into the same platoon, and we also were able to sleep in the same room. And all of this was unplanned, made everything so much better, and we ended up becoming great friends. Don't even know why I'm trying this so late in a thread. You made it, but I think I have a good one. 2 years ago, I and my buddies went to Indonesia to go backpacking. After 2 months, we ended up in the north of Sumatra to go on a jungle hike for a week. We decided to travel 10 hours from Medan plus another 4 hours further to get to the less touristic routes. At this point, we were in the middle of freaking nowhere, so we started our journey into the jungle. Our third day in, we had to set up camp at a river, and I was reading a book on one of the cliffs. I was facing the camp where my friends were, and the way we came when all of a sudden something touched my shoulder. I jump and almost fall off the cliff when someone holds me. I look back and an Indonesian man is standing behind me who just hacked a path through the bushes. I didn't hear it because of the water of the river. Behind him is a girl. I look at her. Holy shit, that's Laura. I went to school with her. I've had classes with her in Holland. I've never been as astonished in my life. Small world. Not sure if this truly applies here, but I went with a group of family and friends to a small coastal town for a long weekend. On one of the days, we planned an offshore fishing trip for the guys. The day before the trip, we were at a little beach bar having some drinks. During the conversation, the discussion turned to the fishing trip and being seasick. My father-in-law is a Vietnam vet Marine. His story of getting seasick was on the trip back to the US in an old Navy ship, the SS Pope. He told the story of a 30-plus day trip in rough seas with almost the entire ship blowing chunks for the duration of the trip home. I'd heard this story before, but some of the others had not. Fast forward an hour or so and a few more beers when one of my friends leans back in his chair and goes, "Holy shit," pointing at the ceiling. We look up, and one of the decorations on the ceiling is an oar with SS Pope stenciled in white. Very odd timing and coincidence. My parents got divorced when I was really young, and I ended up living with my dad in California. Since the divorce, I've never met my mom. I always wanted to meet her. I knew she was alive, but my dad wouldn't give me any info about her. All I had was a photograph he didn't know that I had found in a drawer in his office. Anyway, when I was like 11, I got sent to this summer camp, and there was this one girl who looked weirdly like me. We did not get along at all, partially because everyone would compare us to each other, and personally, I hated it. She was from England, so I have no idea why she was even at this camp in America. Doesn't really make sense when you think about it. Anyway, it got so bad between us that we had a sort of prank war. Things escalated a bit, and we were both punished by being put together in a cabin all alone. Pretty irresponsible to just leave us out there without counselors when you think about it. Now, I love Oreos and peanut butter. It's my favorite snack, and my dad's housekeeper had sent me off to camp with plenty of both. Now, here's where it gets crazy. This girl also loved those things. We got to talking, and it turns out her parents also got divorced when she was little, only she stayed with her mom and never knew her dad. She also only had one photograph of her dad, and she had brought it with her. It was my being dad, no mistake. And to top it off, when I showed her the picture of my mom, which I had brought with me, she confirmed it was her mom. Our parents never told us, but we were long-lost sisters, in fact, identical twins. which you really think everyone would have picked up immediately, but because we look so identical, we're basically the same person. Okay, Lindsay. 6 degrees of separation have come around to bite me in the ass multiple times. I'll share the biggest stretch here. My mother's a highly skilled nurse who volunteers at summer camps for disabled people. One camper grew to be a counselor and he became friends with my mother. Years later, I met this guy and he regaled me with tales of comics and game store that he owned with some friends. Turns out, I was currently sharing a house with all 3 of his old friends. Another one. During my college days, my social studies teacher showed the class an episode of an HBO documentary series. They were profiling a young couple and their newborn daughter, where the mother had physical disabilities that severely restricted her movement. The husband was my uncle. I had to bring in wedding photos to prove to the class that I wasn't slinging bullcrap. I was at Bonnaroo this year and my girlfriend and I weaseled our way closer and closer through the crowd. My friend A is super short and this guy taps her on the shoulder and asks if she'd like to sit on his shoulders so she can get a better view. When a stranger asks you if you want to watch a concert on his shoulders, there's one answer: yes please. A storm rolled in. The music paused all over the farm, and the benevolent strangers set A back to the ground. Not wanting to abandon our concert spots, we linger, and so does the stranger, J and his friend N. We're all chatting. What shows have you seen, introductions, and where are you from? His friend N has these clear blue eyes and this wonderfully bushy beard. His eyes are familiar in that timbre of his voice, and it hits me. This is N from high school. I ask and he blinks and is like, holy shit, Friday lady. Let me elaborate that our high school graduating class totaled 65 people. And here, 6 hours from home, in a crowded field, I find N at least 5 years since I've last seen him. The 4 of us hung out all night. It turns out N has been here, living life not only well, but in happy, happy bliss. To top off what a small world, at the time, he and his girlfriend were staying in our hometown for a spell and were actually staying with friends just down the road from my parents. Sometimes I still can't believe it. I feel like we'll meet again, and I can't wait to see where. I was traveling from Peoria, Illinois to the UK. I got on the Amtrak in Bloomington and ended up having to sit next to a really nice guy. We spent the train ride chatting for a bit and then parted ways at Union Station. I had time. I had to be at the airport and wanted to do a bit of shopping. I went up to the mall in North Michigan and I bumped into the guy there who said he was just getting some shopping done while he was up here. I thought nothing of it and we parted ways again. I go to leave the mall and I bump into him outside and comment on how it is getting ridiculous now and such and go to get some lunch together, seeing as we'll likely go to the same place anyway. After lunch, he tells me he has to go grab some stuff, and that he's leaving the city, so we part ways again. Maybe 20 minutes later, I get on the blue line to go to the airport, and the guy who sat in the carriage I got into is the same guy. We laugh about it. I sit next to him, and we chat for our trip up to O'Hare, where we both get off. We make our way up to the baggage check-in area. He doesn't have any luggage, so we say our goodbyes, and he just heads to security while I go to check in my bags. While I'm waiting for my flight, I stop into a bar to get a drink, and sitting at the only open stall right next to me is the same guy I've been seeing all day. We have a few drinks together, and are having a good time when over the loudspeakers the last call for my flight, at which point both of us get up to hurry to the plane. We were on the same flight. We get to the gate, and he just gets taken straight through to get on the plane. I have to go up to the desk because they've given my seat away to someone else. After a little bit of waiting, they bumped me up to business class because they had a spare seat there. I get on the plane, and the seat they assigned me is right next to the same guy. We drank, watched movies, and talked for the whole flight. It was probably the most fun I've had on a plane trip. Then when we landed at Heathrow, we parted ways, joking that we would probably have the same ride out of the airport or the same flight home. I never saw him again. This might be a long read, but it is well worth it. One of the myriad cool stories I have is about my grandparents. In the wake of World War II, my grandparents emigrated from Germany to the United States. It started with my Oma making a trip to New York in 1948. She spoke no English, had no money to speak of, and had no family or friends, but found a network of other Germans to help her get on her feet in this strange new country. She found a job as a cook for a wealthy family. She saved and saved and saved, and eventually saved enough money to return to Germany to visit her husband. When she returned, she insisted that he join her in New York. My Opa was struggling with the decision because the Wehrmacht wanted him to stay as an instructor to the next generation of soldiers. He was a highly decorated panzer commander, leaving with the rank of Hauptmann. He begrudgingly agreed. They returned to America in 1950, and my grandmother went back to work as a cook, and my grandfather found work as an artist. He was formally trained in Germany and wound up painting the elaborate displays on New York City businesses. They eventually saved enough money to open their own business, a travel agency. Around this time, my grandmother became pregnant, something German doctors told her would never happen. Also at this time, they decided to become American citizens, a process that was much simpler in those times. In order to become a full-fledged American, they were required to renounce their German citizenship at the German embassy. They filed the appropriate paperwork, and the German government made one last fleeting attempt to ask them to return to Germany. Naturally, they rejected the offer and in 1954 became U.S. citizens. In December of that year, my dad was born. In 1956, they bought their first house in East Rutherford, New Jersey, which back then was a nice area, believe it or not. I still remember when I was a kid visiting all of the original homeowners that still lived there. Nobody was from the USA. They were Polish, Germans, Italians, etc. It was a really fun neighborhood. Shortly after moving into their new big American house, my grandparents decided they wanted to use their extra space to help other immigrants moving to the USA. They took in countless families from all over Germany and Eastern Europe. They'd move in, get their feet on the ground, and move out. Fast forward about 40 years. I'm 15 years old, and like most other 15-year-old guys, I mowed as many yards as I could to make money. There was a guy named Frank around the corner who I helped out for free because he had a massive heart attack. I mowed his yard in the miserable Texas heat every week. One afternoon, as I was finishing up drinking a Coke with him, he invited me and my family over for dinner to thank me for the work. I mentioned my Oma was visiting, and he said, "Fine, my mother is visiting also. Bring everyone." I thought, cool, another German my Oma can talk to. So we went over there that evening for dinner, and it didn't happen right away, but after about 10 minutes, my Oma and Frank's mom realized who each other were. Frank's dad died in the war, and his mother and he, as a young boy, immigrated through Ellis Island and stayed at my grandparents' home for nearly 4 months in the late 50s. Frank's mother eventually moved from her home in New York to Texas to be closer to her son, and my Oma would come for extended visits to spend time with her. It was really amazing, the friendship they shared. My Oma was a social butterfly. She never met a stranger, and everyone loved her. Sadly, we lost my Oma just a few months ago at the ripe old age of 98. There are a lot of cool stories like this involving my grandparents. I could go on for days talking about them. Sorry this is so long-winded, but I really enjoyed telling these stories, and this is the first time I've actually written about one of them online. This is still my short version of the story.